One. Hey guys, and welcome back to the Squats and Sushi podcast. How'd I do?
Okay. Today's topic is about how to build your glutes and hamstrings specifically, because I think building legs in general is quite straightforward. Just train your legs. But what I've noticed is, and I know that I had this problem when I first started. It was incredibly difficult to target glutes and hamstrings.
hmm
One of Annabelle's strengths, I would say, is actually her glutes and hamstrings, but we're still focusing on bringing them up so that they're on the pro league level. So they're basically always a work in progress, especially for most females.
hmm
So we wanted to share with you our tips on how to specifically target them, what things you need to consider when wanting to build them, and just like everything in between.
I was actually surprised when you said glutes and hamstrings are my strength
I
because
think they are.
I always felt like my quads are very
Mm,
dominant.
well,
And
yeah,
when we talk about
I would say
exercise,
your legs in general.
hmm,
Yeah, for sure.
because that's one thing, I guess we could like dive right into it. When you're performing a movement for your glutes and your hamstrings and your quads kick in,
Mm-hmm.
remember when we started,
Yeah,
and so many times I would start feeling my quads
yeah,
over my hamstrings.
yeah. So that usually happens because every single person has different biomechanics, right? And not to get too sciencey, but what that essentially means is everyone's body is made differently. So some people have long legs, some people have long torsos,
hmm
some people have long arms. So if you take someone who has long arms, they're going to be really good at deadlifts, right? If you take someone who has long legs, they're not going to be good for squats because imagine how long it takes them to reach depth of a squat, right?
Yeah.
So you have to look at that's why some of you have probably heard like not every exercise fits every single person, and it's important to look at your body and understand what movements are going to work for you. That doesn't
Right.
necessarily mean like, okay, I have long legs, I'm not going to squat. That doesn't mean that. It just means that you need to understand that if your squats don't progress as quickly as you want them to progress, it may just be that you're not made to be efficient at squats, right?
Squats.
Um,
Or find a variation that's more suitable for you, right?
yeah,
That you can
exactly.
well, yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Have to be the barbell back squat.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Um, and when it comes to like what muscles you feel, so again, biomechanically and genetically, let's say you're just really quad dominant. The way you walk, the way you move, you tend to shift more of your weight to the front part of your body. So you're most likely going to have not overdeveloped, but just more developed quads. So then when you try and do something like a squat, you'll see that your quads want to do more of the work, right?
Right.
And if you just train and you don't think about what's actually working, you'll end up just using the muscle your body's comfortable using.
It's the easiest. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So it's very important to go into the exercise and actually know what you're targeting.
hmm
So ask yourself, like, okay, I'm doing squats. Like, what do I want to feel? I do think with a lot of the compound movements, you actually just want to feel everything.
Everything. Yeah.
Um,
Because that's something I always told you that squats feel very weird for me. And I think that I've been trying to focus on feeling my glutes, feeling my hamstrings, and that's been throwing me off. So
yeah,
when you say that when you squat, you're actually supposed to feel your overall leg,
yeah.
that would
You can make a squat more glute and hamstring dominant. We definitely, for example, in your case, we definitely want to feel glutes and hamstrings more. But if we completely forget about the quads and we don't engage them, it's just gonna cause the squat to be quite imbalanced. Like you may lean back too much, or in your case, do you remember you were leaning forward quite a lot,
or
that you were raising your hips more? So yeah, for a lot of the compound movements, you want to just get strong on that movement and use every muscle that is involved in that movement, as opposed to like, I'm just going to make it hamstring dominant, you know?
and getting stronger in the compound movements, they later translate to the accessory movements,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. So yeah, we can now start talking about the specific movements that we would recommend that are, glute and hamstring dominant. So you all heard of, like, deadlifts, squats, what are some other ones, like RDLs, right? So all of those movements, they're not going to just use one muscle. Like, you'll be surprised, but when you do like RDL, you also use your back. You will build your back doing that. You won't really use your quads, but you would use your hamstrings, glutes, back, potentially even your triceps and biceps in some cases, because you're holding the bar. With something like squats, you use your core, your back, quads, glutes. So that's why you've probably heard people say, oh, squats are not good for glutes. Have you heard of that before?
I have.
Yeah.
They're not the best glute builder.
Yeah, and it's because it's not only using the glutes, but I personally think it's a great movement to just build everything, right? And after you've done your compounds, you want to focus on accessory movements or isolation movements, if you want to call them that. The only problem with isolation movements is that the progression in strength compared to something like a squat or a deadlift or DL is not going to be as quick. Guess why? Let's see if you know why.
Continue.
We'll have a think. If it's an isolation movement, what does that mean?
Why do I get so nervous when you ask me questions?
No, it's good. I always
I still see you as a coach and I'm like the student. I think that's why I'm so quiet sometimes. I'm like, she knows.
I think it's good to learn, or to like help the listeners learn by just asking questions. So what I mean by what is isolation, it means that you are using a single muscle, right? Isolated, right?
How come you didn't mention the hip thrust in the compounds? Because it is meant to be an isolating movement. Is that why?
I feel like the thing with hip thrust is kind of like a gray area. I think it's like in between. Because sometimes it's mistaken for compound movement because it's with a barbell. But I don't actually think that a hip thrust involves that many muscles. If you think about it, first of all, the range of motion isn't that big.
No.
And you're literally just moving your hips.
So it's just glutes and hamstrings.
Yeah.
And a little bit of quad, I guess.
Yeah.
Sometimes
But with isolation, so because it's only using, let's say in a compound movement, you use like 4 or 5 muscles. With an isolation, you use 2. So that's why your progression in strength won't be as fast as with a compound, because you're using less muscles, right? So they're going to get fatigued quicker.
Right.
That's why you've probably noticed, like, how come, with a Bulgarian split squat, how much do you usually do per side?
Like 35-pound dumbbells.
35-pound dumbbells.
30 pound, yeah.
And then when you do a squat, how much do you usually do?
Like 135.
Yeah. So can you see how your strength on a squat is a lot more? Whereas most people think, like, wouldn't it just be, if I'm doing single leg squats, like, wouldn't that just be half of what I usually do? But it's not like that. So the good thing about isolation movements is you can switch off the muscles you're not looking to specifically grow, So sure, you have like 2 compounds at the start of your session as an example that target everything, but then you can do like a glute focused session where then you go into those exercises after. So do you want to,
I have so many questions now.
if you want, you can ask them now. Or I was going to say, do you want to run through some exercises that you personally, like for your body, that you feel engage your glutes and hamstrings the best, and why? Sure. Have they always been like that, or is it just because you've learned to change a certain thing that's made you be able to engage it more? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Sure. Let's do our top 3 exercises each for glutes and hamstring. Number 1, I'd say my hip thrust now is a lot better.
Mm-hmm.
Before, it was a lot about getting weight and just stacking plates on the barbells and mindlessly lifting. I
Mm-hmm.
think ever since I've changed my form, it has gotten a lot better, and I can connect very well with my glute and like that hamstring tie-in. That's
Yeah.
where I feel it the most.
What did
And
you change?
what I changed was like my hip thrust form. You know how you need to almost create like a tilt, like is it an anterior pelvic tilt, right? So I think
You do
at the
posterior.
bottom I would go
Yeah.
like I would arch too much, and then at the top this arch would continue.
Yeah.
So what I now do, I like
Yeah. You
keep
posterior
this
tilt.
tight, and then yeah, so it's posterior.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
So
really
fixing that
good.
and making sure that my knees are in line with my ankles, that's
Mm-hmm.
definitely helped.
Yeah.
And I connect a lot better with it, and just using less weight.
Yeah.
I still don't understand how I see girls who perform the movement with like 3 plates on each side, 2 plates on each side. I never got up to that.
Yeah. So I think, unfortunately, there is this kind of misconception like, yes, you do want to progressively overload, that's for sure.
Mhm.
But if you progressively overload with incorrect form and technique, or like you just don't feel the muscle working, you're progressively overloading a different muscle. So you're, for example, like
Yeah,
hamstrings or your quads.
right.
And if your form is incorrect, you're not actually engaging the muscle, so you're using momentum. And I feel like hip thrust is one of those movements. It's
Where people do that. It's
use
so easy to
momentum,
do that.
so easy, you know. So then you're actually just cheating yourself. And
It's
I've
almost like leg presses too.
yeah,
You'll see people stack on so much weight, but they won't get the depth,
no,
or they're just like
yeah,
doing it way too quickly.
yeah. And
Yeah.
also you need to remember, if you're a power lifter, right? Like even in powerlifting, you need good technique, but sure, you know, load up the plates. But if you're a bodybuilder, you're trying to build a specific muscle, you're trying to hypertrophy that muscle, right? So it's so important that you feel that muscle actually working. Otherwise,
Yeah.
you're not going to be building it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, that's obviously a good exercise. What would you say is another one?
Another. Um, I'll do one just for hamstrings, like the seated ham curl machine.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I connect every single rep.
Yeah,
There's not one rep that feels off.
that's really
And
good.
it feels so hard. I love it because
Yeah.
I like exercises too. I know we're not talking about quads, but ones that I feel very stable with.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I like the seated ham curl because I could press on that front thing to hold me
Yeah,
down. I can
yeah,
like grip the seat and pull
yeah.
myself down, just like an extension with like a seat belt or something that keeps my hips down. I really like that.
Yeah.
That helps.
So, do you remember how I think you actually mentioned this? You went to Ben Pak's um, seminar, and he was talking about how stability is so important.
Stability will give
And
you
the
better
thing is, like,
contractions.
someone can be very stable just through like training stability specifically. So, like, let's say standing on one leg, having a strong core, like that's also stability, right? But
Yeah.
for those of us who, let's say, just come from a background where they're just not stable, um, you're not going to be efficient at building muscle if you're doing an exercise that you're not stable in, correct? So that's why with something like seated hamstring curl, you're so stable in that position. You can just like sit into the seat, have that thing like literally press down on your legs, and
Press
you can just
down.
focus on the hamstring movement.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That one's great. And then third movement, I'll do like there's so many. I don't know. I want to say an RDL because again, that's a movement that I connect super well with like that glute ham tie-in area. I just feel it there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but we could do like a single leg movement. So I'll pick Bulgarians for that.
Yeah.
It's really tough.
That's a really good movement. And also with Bulgarians, you can, depending where your foot position is, so this is a tip for some of you. If you're doing an exercise and you really want to make it more glute focused, think about where your foot positioning is, because if your knees go over your toes, you're going to make it more quad dominant.
Right.
If your knee stays in line with your foot, so if you have like literally a 90-degree, you're going to use your glutes and hamstrings more.
So it is about like a closer stance or a wider stance.
Yeah, definitely makes sense.
Not necessarily a lean, people, because I was making this mistake.
So,
My foot position was great, but I don't know why in my head I thought I need to lean in order to feel the
when
glute
you
more.
lean, it makes it easier, because what ends up happening is you raise your hips and you actually almost start using your back as well.
Your lower back, yeah.
Whereas, and you don't really use your like your quads, because you're literally just raising your hips up.
Right.
And if you raise your hips before coming up, you're not actually engaging your glutes and hamstrings either. So as soon as you remember, when you started doing it more upright, you could engage your, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's why your form is so important. Yeah.
Yeah. How about you? What are some?
I would agree massively on the hip thrust. This has always been one of those movements that I feel personally engage my glutes a lot. But I have a tendency to have hip issues when I train. And obviously, going through my recent injury, I've learned a lot about my body. And I know that my abductors are just genetically very weak. They're just, even no matter how much I train them, they just don't want to work. So what I need to do to have the best hip thrust is to have like a band around my legs, like a hip circle.
Yeah.
When I have a hip circle, I can feel my glutes perfectly. When I don't have it, I only feel my hamstrings working. And I literally try so many different things, and for some reason, I just don't really feel my glutes working as much.
Okay.
They're like the secondary, like I do feel them a bit, but they're more of a secondary muscle.
Yeah.
So doing little things like that, like putting a band, just makes your, I don't use a heavy one, like not a strong one, but it just tells your mind to use the abductors as well. So for me, that's a really good movement, as well as single leg hip thrusts. And then I would say sumo deadlifts for me. There has been quite a lot of stuff out saying that sumo deadlifts are not the best exercise for glutes.
For glutes, yeah.
But I mean, I personally would disagree, because when I do sumo deadlifts, I personally feel my glutes and hamstrings working more than anything, and even my adductors, so the inside of my leg.
The inside.
So I don't know. I
I
personally
wanted to tell you something. So sorry, just before I forget. Not only sumo deadlifts, I actually feel my glutes working on conventional deadlifts. Is that normal?
for sure.
So much.
Yeah.
I was surprised. I'm like, actually more than sumo,
More
just glute. Mm-hmm.
So again, maybe this is to do with your biomechanics, and obviously what you need to remember is with sumo deadlifts, the range that you travel is a lot shorter.
Shorter, yeah.
Yeah, whereas with conventional deadlifts, obviously you're going to travel more. And if you have long legs and you do conventional deadlifts, the starting and ending position of your glutes, you're going to travel so much if you think about it, right? Whereas if you have short legs, it's not really gonna, or short femurs, it's not gonna be that big of a difference.
Right.
So yeah, for some people, definitely they feel it more in conventional deadlifts. For some people, they feel it more with sumos.
Also, a lot of girls want to know why we do elevated sumos, or why we used to do elevated sumos.
Okay, so with elevated sumos, you take your back, I would say, more out of the equation, so you can really focus on your glutes and hamstrings.
Mm-hmm.
And it's basically like a step back from doing sumo deadlifts.
An actual sumo, yeah.
Yeah. So I think when someone's in a dieting phase, like as much as I love compound lifts, if they are a bodybuilder, I want to make sure that they are lifting as efficiently as possible. So they have, like, I've used this example many times, but they have like a battery, let's say 100% battery, right? The more that they diet and the longer they're in prep, that battery, like, it stays at 100, but the capacity is less, right? So let's say Annabelle used to be able to do three sets twice a week with deadlifts. And then obviously after she has dieted for, let's say, 10 weeks, she now, to perform the same numbers, she's going to have to reduce her volume. Otherwise, she's not recovering enough, right? So it's the same thing with exercise selection. You need to take the deadlift and be like, this exercise is very
Is
demanding
extremely taxing.
and
Now,
taxing.
how can I make it less but keep the movement
Yeah.
in?
So does it provide me enough stimulus to keep it in, but then have to have 2 or 3 days to recover from it? Probably not. So how can we still keep a variation of it in, but allow her to recover? So
Very
sumo
smart.
block pulls is like a really good exercise for that, because that, you know, the hardest part of a deadlift is like lifting, getting it off the ground. Some people would argue that it's the locking out, but I genuinely think that when you're tired and fatigued, that in like lifting it off the ground is the thing that
Is the
requires the most effort.
Yeah.
And that's why you've probably noticed that you can go a lot heavier on the block pulls than
So much more.
yeah. And that's literally the reason why. So that's the main reason why I would put sumo block deadlifts, and it's also a variation. So if you've done that for one training block, the next one you can do regular deadlifts. Another variation is deficit deadlift. So you stand on a plate and then the bar is on the floor. So that's actually harder.
That's even harder than the ground.
Yeah. But again, it's just a variation. It's obviously going to require you to use different muscles as well.
Right.
The same, but obviously because it is more challenging, you will have to probably engage more muscles. So that's the main reason. It's not a magic exercise. No exercise, in my opinion, is magic. I just think it's good to.
Yesterday, I was watching a video of Team Elite Physique, Coach Adam, and he was interviewing Frida, like best glutes in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they were doing like the EMG thing to see what exercises connect well, or like what she could target. Yeah. So I was surprised that for her hip thrust, she says that she never goes heavier than 135, a plate on each side.
Yeah. Yeah.
She said that's the heaviest that she goes. And then another thing, and I think we could get into this topic, is she does glute kickbacks on a cable.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on the glute kickbacks? Do you think that's more of a sculpting exercise, as they said, and it's not necessarily going to grow?
Yeah. So
glutes like compounds? It's like when you already have the muscle, that's when you would do something like that?
Yeah. So this is what my honest thoughts are. If you only do kickbacks, so let's say you have a glute and hamstrings workout, yeah, and you just do kickbacks and hamstring curls and donkey kicks, yeah, which is the same thing you're on the floor. You're gonna see progress, but it's gonna slow down for sure, because like it's not, in my opinion, it's not enough stimulus on the muscle. The weight isn't always going to equal gains, but if you think about it realistically, like, can you progress your kickbacks? The weight that you use with kickbacks? No, like I think like looking back over 5 years, I think I only increased by like 3 on the stack, by 3 of those things. So the real reason why they work is you need to think of like overall weekly volume or monthly volume on a muscle, right? So if I do a leg session and I do squats, I do deadlifts, I do hip thrusts, and then I also add in kickbacks, what I've just done is that kickback is adding more volume to my glutes on the session, right? And because it's such a specific exercise, like it's literally just targeting that area, you know that you've specifically added more volume to the glutes, right? Also, I think it works as a muscle mind builder. So that's why for some girls, it may be beneficial to do it at the start of their session, because it activates the muscle and gets some blood in the area. So then when they go and do something like deadlifts, because that muscle is already switched on, it's going to fire more when they do something like deadlifts, right? But then equally for some people, it's a good finisher, just to, again, increase a bit more volume without like fatiguing them at the start of the training session, right? So different for every single person. And that's why with some people I've included it one day, I include it at the start of the session, and then on another day at the end of the session.
We'll include at the end.
So I do think kickbacks, at the end of the day, a kickback is a hip extension movement, which is literally what the glutes do, right? That's their function. So it is a good exercise, but if you just do kickbacks as your main glute builder, you're not going to build any muscle. Well, you will, but it will plateau very quickly.
Right. I mean, it's just like saying that, I don't know if this is a great comparison, but just doing lateral raises for your delts. Will it grow? Yes, but are there other movements that'll help it develop even more? Of course.
So think of a press as the compound lift for the delt. So any incline pressing, shoulder pressing, that's going to really help grow your delts. But then doing lateral raises is what really helps to target just that. Because with a shoulder press, you're also going to use your triceps, you're going to use some of your chest, even your rear delts, you know, whereas like with lateral raises, you're literally really targeting this cable ones. You just feel them go on fire, you know? Yeah. So yeah, I hope that kind of explains like the kind of role of kickbacks. And there's lots of exercises like that. Apart from kickbacks, you have things like hyperextensions, reverse hyperextensions. Like they're great movements, but because they're so specific that it's just one muscle working, maximum two, you know, it's very difficult to continue progressively overloading on it.
And then you just go, it's more about the tempo and like the feel, like the reverse hyperextension. That's the part that we're trying to focus on, right? Like the top glute.
Yeah, so again, this is very genetic as well. Like some people just naturally have glutes that just have that shelf, but the best exercises to build that is reverse hyperextension, abduction, like the abductor, hyperextension.
Can we take a moment to talk about the abductors and tell people to just sit down and do them?
Yeah, so we'll...
Why? I don't understand.
Why do people stand?
Yeah, why people stand. And there's another one that I've seen. Oh no, I'll have to send you a video, but that's actually for adductors. They'll sit, I've seen people at FEBs, they go like this. They sit on the seat and they'll go like this with their foot.
Oh, honestly, like, see, this is the thing, right? So I don't know whether this is just because I've been in the industry for, I guess, 6 years. I've been training now properly. And I've tried everything. Like I used to be one of those people, but like there's a reason why you like, I know this guy is not a bikini athlete, but let's just take Arnie. Yeah. He's the one who kind of popularized bodybuilding. He was the first ever, you know,
pioneer. Yeah.
But like he literally stuck to the basics, right? And it's because basics work. If you get really good at the basics, you're going to look phenomenal, right? What happens is a lot of people get very bored of the basics because they think, oh, like as if squats are gonna work, you know, they think they think there's a magic recipe, it needs to be confusing to progress. You have to come out of your session feeling so fatigued that to make progress, right? When the reality is, it's actually the opposite. If you're coming out of your session feeling absolutely shattered, you've probably overtrained, and you're going to really feel that over the next few days, and that will affect your following sessions, which you don't want, right? You want to hit just enough volume. When it comes to exercise selection, right? If you're doing something that's like super confusing, what's going to happen is, first of all, it's probably going to take you ages to set the exercise up, right? Which is, again, very annoying and time consuming. It's probably not going to put you in a safe position, which again can make you end up injuring yourself. And you're probably going to be unstable. And like, if you think about it, if you can get the same stimulus from just sitting down, why would you complicate it and do like standing up and stuff? So I think it's more of like, it's become a hype thing. Like people see other people do it on Instagram and stuff.
So they want to try it.
Yeah.
It's that thing that we mentioned, I think, in the previous one, where people just want novelty, and
Yeah.
like that, they get bored, they want to switch it up. Whereas if they were to just stick with the basics and progress on that, they'll see amazing results.
Yeah. I've actually really come off the abductor and adductor machine.
Really?
Yeah. So I personally think that's also contributed to potentially some of my injury, and I'll talk about why. So unfortunately, not all of us have a textbook body. So what does that mean? It means that when you go and do something like an abductor, you're stuck in one position, right? You're stuck in that specific machine. So that's why, you know, you have, if you take a Cybex machine, if this is a brand of a machine, Cybex abductor, let's say hammer strength abductor, and then Nautilus abductor, right? They're all going to feel different.
Yeah.
Some people prefer some people go, oh, I love, this is my favorite abduction machine, and it's the Cybex, you know. Other people go like, really? But I think this one's better. The reason you hear this a lot, people go, oh, this is my favorite machine, is because their body is suited more for the way that machine was built, right? The best ones are obviously the ones where you can also move the seat back, because, you know, if you have a specific posture that actually is better when the seat is like that, you will feel it more. And the problem with the abductor is because you're stuck in one plane of motion, if your hips don't fit that plane of motion and you keep moving in that position, you're actually injuring your hip joints, if you think about it, right? Yeah. Whereas with something like a squat, you can lean back, you can lean slightly forward, you can have your legs closer, wider. So it's very difficult to injure yourself. Well, you can injure yourself squatting if you're not doing it correctly, but I mean, you can tailor it to your body.
Yes.
Whereas with an abductor, really, you can't really tailor it. So I don't mind people doing like abduction when it's a lighter weight, for example. But if you're using that as an exercise to go super heavy on, I personally don't think that an abductor is going to build your glutes. And this is a recent thing. I never used to think like that, but after doing research on myself as well, and realizing that that exercise is not actually going to be like mega hypertrophic. And if you look at a lot of people's programs who have big glutes, they don't even do the abductor. Is because it's not actually necessary. And I think what's better for you, I've put this in your program, is groin planks, because that's such a safe movement. How are you going to injure yourself doing that? You can't. And it works on your own strength. You can be in the position that suits you. So for your adductors is great. For abduction, you can do an exercise where you basically push into the wall and you basically squeeze your abductor.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't think I've seen that before.
I'll show it to you. But what I'm trying to say is that, like, I feel really bad for a lot of girls who just go on those abductor machines, when in reality, like, there's far better exercises. Like, use your energy and do an extra set of Bulgarian split squats. You'll see better progress with that, you know?
Yeah.
So I'm like literally changing the way that I go about some of the exercises. Like, I'm not saying it's a bad exercise, you can still do it, but definitely it's not the best one for.
Yeah. Isn't that cool how every year your thoughts just change?
100%. But it makes sense. Like, you know, I was always very pissed off that my gym doesn't have the abductor and adductor. Like, they just didn't have. And now I'm kind of starting to understand that if I have a weak adductor, doing the adductor machine isn't necessarily going to train that. It might just be training my hip, like, to move in that way. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah. So the best things you can do is just get strong across like the main movements.
Could we also talk about the squat? Because a lot of people still think that they need to force themselves to go ass to grass, and that
Okay, yeah.
they don't need to. They end up injuring themselves. And like,
Yeah.
why are you going to squat ass to grass if you have a butt wing?
Yeah. So on this topic of like building glutes and stuff, I think I want to also touch on like overtraining. And this is coming from someone myself who used to train 4 times a week, my lower body, when I first got into training. And then this, you know, over the years resulted in, even if I cut it down, it still resulted in me getting an injury. And it's because you need to really understand that it's about quality over quantity. And some top athletes I know, they only train like 4 times a week because they train so well and so heavy because they're so strong after
Right.
training for so long. If they train more than 4 times a week, their quality goes down. And, you know, they're not performing as well in their sessions. It increases their chance of injury. So really think about, you know, if you're trying to force an extra session, make sure that you're actually going to be able to give the same sort of quality to it.
Quality.
And to talk about what Annabelle mentioned with the like going all the way down as to grass, you need to understand that everyone, again, back to the biomechanics thing, everyone's body is designed differently.
Mhm.
So what you need to do is literally right now, stand up and just do a body weight squat, just a comfortable body weight squat, making sure you're not leaning forward, you're literally bending your legs, so you're squatting. Your heels don't come off the ground, so make sure your foot is flat, and just do a body weight squat. So once you've done it, right, that is how far you should go down. So the best way to assess is just to have someone do a body weight squat, making sure that nothing changes. So they still stay upright, they still engage their core. As soon as you see someone's, you know what a butt wink is?
Yeah, when their
As
hips
soon
like
as you see that, or you see them leaning forward, that means that for them to go that low, their body is starting to make a compensation, right?
Mhm.
So you need to look the same going down. Does that make sense? Yeah. So going all the way as to grass might make you feel like you have more range of motion, but if you're going outside of your range of motion, then you're actually not benefiting yourself. So
respect your range of motion,
yeah.
basically.
And so
Yeah.
some people might go, oh, well, how do I know what my range of motion is? So for a lot of exercises, there's ways to test that. So I've just explained how to do it. For a squat, if you're doing something like a shoulder press, literally just sit down, go like this. And then when you start to feel, like for me, it would probably be around here. If I go here, this I feel is now relaxed,
Mm-hmm.
not working anymore. And I'm actually starting to feel it more here. So that's the best way for you to kind of assess it.
Not necessarily the greater, like the more range of motion that you have
No.
is the best. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because a
So,
lot of people think that.
but
But
having
that's not
said
the case.
that, obviously, if someone's doing that, you can tell that that's not the full range of motion. It's literally, it would be something like from here to here. That's when, for some people, if they're super flexible, this might be where they can go, whereas for other people, it would be here.
Yeah.
And it's quite easy to tell by looking at a video whether someone's going out of the range of motion. So, for example, if Annabelle sends me a video, she's doing shoulder press, I'm going to show you an example. If she comes down here and her elbow now goes back here, so she's doing a shoulder press and it's like this is where she's going out of her range of motion because she's literally now changed the angle and this is what's
Mm-hmm.
happening, right? So we want to make sure that she stays in the
Within.
exact same position as she was here. Does that make sense?
It
Whereas
does.
here, she's now having to do that. So that means that now all of the pressure is being put on this area, on like the scapula, and that can actually cause an injury. For something like a squat, if you constantly do that butt wink, you're putting your pelvis in this position, which again is going to cause an injury.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess the easiest way to say it is if you see something change in your body at the end of like at the bottom of the movement, something is compensating.
Mm-hmm.
So try and keep the same form throughout. Make sure you engage your core. Um, That's a huge one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Trying to think what else specifically to talk about. I think those are the main things, is like range of motion, form,
Activation before.
activation. So before training, this is a good one. You know, if you're starting your session and you're about to do lower body, how should you activate your glutes? So honestly, I think there is no right answer here, because again, everyone's body is different. So if you do body weight hip thrusts or glute bridges from the floor, you do like, I don't know, 2 sets of like 15 reps body weight, and you really feel that that activates and fires your glutes, then that is the best warm up for you. If you're someone who does the lateral band walks and you feel that really activates your glutes, then that's for you.
Yeah.
So I think it's different for everyone, and over the years you will find what works better
You'll
for you.
find what works for you.
Yeah,
I do 10 to 15 squats, 10 to 15 lunges on each side, and glute bridges, and I'm set.
perfect. So,
Yeah, maybe
because
like
that's
2
the other
sets.
thing. You don't want this to tire you out, or to, you know, have you go into your
That's another mistake I see a lot of people make. They spend like 45 minutes just on warming up.
yeah. I think unless you're
That's
a
a bit
power
too
lifter,
long, isn't it?
it is long. But if you're a power lifter and you're someone who squats 200 kilos as your
Then
working set, yes, you're gonna have to warm up a lot longer. But for most listeners, probably, especially if you're female, and this isn't me being sexist, this is me literally being honest, because we don't lift as heavy as guys and our joints are a lot more flexible just by nature, we probably don't need to warm up as long as guys. But that still doesn't mean that you can just go in and just start training. Yeah, but I think that's pretty much it. There's not much else that I would add to the glute training.
no, I think we covered.
Kind of summarize it, or just say really focus on the basics. Honestly, just don't complicate it for yourself, just, yeah, just nail the basics. And then once you've nailed the basics and you get to a place where maybe you're like, you've been training for like 5 years, then potentially you'll need to really start thinking about like the volume you do, or you training correctly and all of that, because you'll start to see a bit of a plateau in your progress. So then you have to be quite smart with what you do moving forward.
Right.
But if you're someone starting out, like, just be simple, stay
Yes.
injury free.
And be very mindful.
Yeah,
Like Sammy said, ask yourself, where am I supposed to be feeling this? And make sure that every single rep you're feeling it. And if it gets to a point when you're performing it and you don't feel it anymore, stop. Don't continue. Stop, reassess. Maybe it's your form, maybe you need lighter weight, and focus on getting that contraction again.
exactly.
Yeah.
But thanks for joining us again. Please let us know if you want any specific topics covered. We'll probably do a Q&A soon. We'll definitely get a guest on. And yeah.
Yes, I spoke with Arundhati.
Oh, did you? Yeah.
Yeah, she said that sometime next week she could.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, we definitely will do that. And then I think we can discuss with her, like what it's like to manage a regular job, like a 9 to 5 job, or in her case, sometimes it was longer than that, and training at the same time.
Yes.
And that's when we can talk also about like quality of the sessions. And, if you're someone who's very occupied, you don't want to be training, 5-6 days a week.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Good stuff.
But yes.
All right. If you guys like this episode, please leave a thumbs up and comments down below.